Hey everyone, Duke here, and the Pantheon is finally out and available. This is going to be the first week of Pantheon, and over the next 4 weeks we're going to be basically making the bosses even harder and adding more bosses every week. This week has 4 bosses, and we're going to go over each of the bosses, all of the changes, and everything you need to know to beat the Pantheon. Start with some basics. For this week, Pantheon is going to be 5 power above you, so you're going to be 5 power underleveled the entire time for all the bosses. Additionally, we have Void Surge and Strand Surge, so you're going to be able to get 25% bonus damage just by using any Void or Strand damage. And finally, our last modifier is a new one called Class Warfare. This is going to allow you to increase your fire team's damage output whenever you use a class ability, and will also reduce incoming damage while it's active. This Class Warfare modifier is definitely one you're going to want to take advantage of, as it can give you a 20% damage buff on top of things like Well and Surges. All you're going to need to do is use your class ability to activate it for 15 seconds, and if you can get 3 people to use it, that's going to give you your ×3 and 20% damage buff. It does have a decently generous radius on giving the Class Warfare buff to both you and your teammates, and do note that by using another class ability while it's still going, you can reset the timer to 15 seconds, so that's definitely going to be another timer you're going to want to be keeping an eye on to keep that ×3 and 20% damage buff going. The rewards for Pantheon are pretty insane, with a guaranteed exotic of your choice for finishing your first run of Pantheon between Eyes of Tomorrow or Touch of Malice. If you already have these, you can also choose either an exotic cipher or 3 ascendant shards, but you'll definitely want to grab one of the exotics if you're missing them. Additionally, this week gives a pretty sweet DSC and Atraks inspired emblem, and you'll also get Spoils of Conquest for completing each encounter, with some bonus spoils for completing the entire Pantheon, along with multiple raid drops from each encounter as well, including Adept weapons from completing the encounters quickly, along with completing the triumphs. And if you need help completing any of the Pantheons this month, I'll be doing a ton of helps on my stream at twitch.tv/DukeIsCool, so come on by. Now let's get into each of the encounters. Our first encounter is Golgoroth. There's a number of small but impactful changes here, and really throughout all of the encounters. Our first one being that you'll notice some additional ad spawns during the ad clear phase. There will be an ogre on one of the 2 sides, as well as some extra boss level knights that replace the smaller knights in the original encounter whenever you see the message "A Portent of the Witness appears." There's also 2 bigger changes when it comes to the mechanics. First, there are now 2 players that will get unstable light per pool instead of 1. This is both a positive and a negative change, in that you can use both to do damage to the boss, and do some very nice additional chunks of damage every single time, but you do need to make sure that your team is really paying attention to the unstable light, as now there's 2 people that are going to need to be seeing this and paying attention to it. I'd recommend communicating heavily for this, both in that you have the unstable light in the first place, and which side of Golgoroth that you're going to stand with the unstable light. You have to do this to make sure that you are not next to the other person that has unstable light for this mechanic, as you can blow each other up just like normal. Even if you both have unstable light, you will end up killing each other with it. But if you stand on either the left and the right side of Golgoroth, or the front and the back of him, that will be far enough away from each other, and allow you to both do damage to Golgoroth and explode on him with both unstable lights. Also, make sure to not leave the pool too early with your unstable light, as you still want to try to do some damage with your weapons first, and you'll end up losing out on a lot of total damage if both people leave the pool and stop doing damage at the very beginning of your unstable light timer. Calling out what side you're going to go to and leaving it about 3 seconds gives you some wiggle room, while still allowing you to get a few extra shots in first. As for the gaze holders, there will be additional invisible minotaurs that will be spawning while you're holding the gaze. I'd highly recommend running a solar subclass with healing grenades as a gaze holder here, while a machine gun may be useful both for shooting these ads and trying to kill them kind of in between, as well as shooting the orbs that track you. Just make sure to definitely not be running anything that can make you invisible, as going invisible while holding the gaze will immediately take it from you and end the phase. This mechanic hasn't changed at all, but is not something that everyone is aware of. As for damage, this week is Strand and Void Surge, so we're going to be prioritizing that in a lot of our damage phases. And our top 2 grenade launchers of Cataphract and Edge Transit with Envious Assassin and Bait and Switch both go crazy here. I could also see a Doomed Petitioner with Surrounded do really well, as well as the classic Type-In being a potential option as well. Our next encounter is Caretaker. There aren't any big mechanical changes here, but there are a number of new and extra ad spawns. The main ones probably being some phalanxes that will be spawning near or basically on top of your stun team, as well as ogres that spawn for the ad clearers whenever the obelisk is activated by the runners. Pulling off the map as a stunner was already a risk and something to look out for, but you're really going to need to be on top of killing these in order to not get booped off. There's also some of the homing purple ball enemies that will be tracking you from these enemies on top of the normal pastas that of course spawn out of Caretaker himself. As for the ogres, they do add a bit of a punch, but if you've done this encounter as the master challenge with all the overloads and ad spawns that comes from those, you shouldn't have much of an issue with this. The running is pretty much exactly the same, although there was a stray pasta or two that would chase us around as runners. Honestly though, it didn't really seem to change much if anything. I do believe there was also potentially an extra wizard in the running room, but as you ignore these anyway, they also didn't really impact much. Two-flooring Caretaker will make beating the timer much easier, as it will most likely be very tight if not two-flooring. If you just care about the clear though, this does not matter. The envious bait and switch GLs are once again going to be insanely strong here, but just be careful to not blow yourself up as the spacing can get a little bit tight. Additionally, a really important mechanic for Caretaker, and again this has not changed, but passing the health gate on a floor gives you bonus damage for about 3 or so seconds before Caretaker goes immune. So trying to save some of your burst damage for right as you're passing that line will allow for a much easier two-phase. And as mentioned at the start of the video, don't forget to use Class Warfare to your advantage, as that is an easy 20% additional damage throughout the entire damage phase as well. If you want to be an extra helpful teammate, you can do what I did where I made 2 separate loadouts for each of these bosses, one for DPS phases with triple surges, and one for the rest of the fight with a scavenger and recuperation for more ammo and more survivability. Our third boss this week is the Planets encounter. The only new mechanic change is that the boss throws out more fire, like a lot more fire, and it also seemed to go further. Solar Resist will be quite beneficial to combat this somewhat. There's also a few new important ad spawns with an incinerator that spawns between the 2 sets of planets on each side that will try to boop you off the map. Killing this before rotating with your planet will help both you and your teammates stay alive. Additionally, there's a Tormentor. Yep, a Tormentor will spawn in the middle of the map after swapping the planets, so you'll want to be ready to deal with this quickly. Do note that it is not a boss level Tormentor, so it can be frozen, suspended, and finishered. As for damage, the same strategies from Caretaker will work extremely well here, those being making use of triple surges and class warfare, along with the ever-present Wall of Radiance, of course, which is useful in all of these. Also, just like with Caretaker, you can still do damage after crossing the health gate on each plate for a couple seconds, so saving some burst for right as you cross this threshold will allow you to get more damage on each plate. Finally, we have Atraks. The main changes here is that the Operator and Scanner will drop from much tankier enemies, the Servitors have shields now, and once again there will be a Tormentor. This Tormentor honestly wasn't a huge threat due to just how much play space there is in this encounter, but I could see that quickly changing in the future, more underleveled weeks of Pantheon. A mix of Arc and Void Resist will be extremely helpful here, as most of the normal enemies such as the Sniper Shanks and the Atraks Supplications shoot out Arc, while the Servitors and Tormentors will be hitting you with Void. Honestly, our damage was incredibly scuffed for Atraks. We tried using Edge Transit here again, but I think the tried and true method of Parasite will most likely be the play going forward. We also didn't bother switching to instant damage supers, and we're still able to comfortably two-phase and stay under the encounter timer, so having some of those normal instant damage supers like Thunder Crash, Nova Bomb, and insert Solar Hunter super of your choice here will still be helpful. I'm also interested to see if you can still one-floor him with some Thunder Crashes, but even if it's possible, it's not something I'd really want to rely on when doing helps, or as we get closer to being 20 under-leveled. That's all for today. As mentioned earlier, I'll be doing helps on my stream all this month for Pantheon, including a few minutes after this video goes live, so come on by. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.